Hey all, artificial intelligence takes real work. We're going to be talking about that and a bunch of other things today. I'm Kurt Trinka.
I'm John Soderberg.
Let's dive in. So let's start with the big picture. My very first question, why isn't AI something you can just turn on and basically expect great results?
Kind of like hiring an employee, there's a lot of work that goes into preparing whatever it is you're trying to solve for with AI. So a lot of work goes into understanding the problem you're solving for, the data that's required, kind of the contextual information that you need to know to assist in solving the problem. And so it's just not a simple flip of a switch, unfortunately.
Right. That makes 100% sense.
Although at times, for some, it feels like it might be.
Yeah. Well, and I think AI is something that people have a lot of familiarity with, so they see it as being easy, but in a workplace environment, that's just not the case.
Correct.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the data that is going to be required for your AI. What are the most common data problems that you're hearing about?
I'll keep it in the context of supply chain. So a lot of problems that come up are challenges, customers who are working in multiple ERP systems, so a lot around product data, product part numbers, many different numbers for the same item is common. Unit of measures, common. You can imagine descriptions and some of the attribution around parts is a common topic of conversation. And really understanding the use of the part as well. So a lot of conversations that we have with our customers are really trying to make sense of what could be just decades of information that's not necessarily organized.
Okay. You say the decades of information. You wrote an article not too long ago where you talked about technical debt. Is that what you're referring to?
Technical debt can be about just legacy systems and things like that.
Okay.
I think the challenge with technical debt is that it tends to drive a legacy behavior where you think something is the way it is and that's the only way it can be. And I think what we encounter quite a bit in conversations internally as well as with customers is the importance of reimagining those things. Like, what if you weren't tied to these? What if you didn't have these constraints? What would that process or workflow look like?
Okay. That was an early curveball. I'll try to stick to the script here. What does it take to clean and standardize the data when you're out in the real world? Like, what's the work involved there?
It's a lot of caffeine and sugar, actually. It requires data ownership, data stewardship.
Sure.
And for us, we certainly went on our own journey. I think every company's got different levels of this. Mm-hmm. And within IT, we had to make sure that the data ownership resided within the business. And once that business owner was identified, we worked very closely with them to make sure that everyone understood the lineage of the data, the definitions of the data, the naming conventions, so really cataloging that information. And I always kind of equate it back to an old library index card. You want to know what you're working with and what section it's in and where it's at, et cetera, where it came from. But that's a lot of work. And if it's not in teamwork with business and IT, it doesn't often happen. I would even go as far to say that it's very important that you take an enterprise approach to this versus more of a siloed department approach, or you'll just create replicated data within different silos of the business. So having a really strong understanding of where the data dependency is coming from, because you want to enable the business to work together to understand how we solve for common challenges within the enterprise. And in order to do that, we've got to be working from a solid data foundation. So
you would straight up tell somebody, don't do just this part of your business. I know you're really gung-ho and you're ready to start, but you should back off until the whole...
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I would say that you can start there.
Yeah.
And you should start there with maybe a domain. I think the domain expertise is really critical, and that's where the business comes into play. Okay. And so if you start with a small area, I think it's important first to identify the use case and then understand the data that's going to be required to help you solve for the use case. And then the stakeholders who are actually interacting with the outcome of the use case and how you're going to measure it. So
Okay, so starting small is acceptable.
It is acceptable, and I think it's expected. I think if you really think about the universe of data within an enterprise, I've heard many different comments and quotes through the years about what percentage of it is actually needed or required. I'll tell you it's a small single-digit percentage, And so you don't want to boil the ocean here. You really want to, within the domains, you want to identify what is the most critical or important data. But I believe it should always start with your strategy and how data aligns to strategy. And then within the domains that support that, what are you measuring and what's important? And then it takes on a life of its own and expands.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay. While we're talking about data, I think it's important you had the phrase in the article, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
What's this mean in relation to supply chain data?
Right. A lot of we interact with a lot of customers and we're helping them on their journey. So we play a key role in helping them identify the data, what's on the floor. So you've got information that resides within systems, and then you have actually what's playing out. What inventory do I have? What assets maybe do I have on the floor? If you run or use AI on what exists, you're often going to get an outcome that is in line with what you entered. So if it's not good information, trusted, grounded information, then your results are going to look
Reflect
as you would
that?
expect. Right.
Yeah.
So that's why we start with sometimes a location within a facility or a department within a facility and really work to clean that information and then grow it out as it's a very repetitive pattern. It's a repeatable pattern. So where we start, how we expand within that is important.
Okay. And I feel like this is the one that you were leading me to, so thank you for that. But why is it important to clean data with expert help? Why is that key?
We've come in behind the scenes or behind projects or teams that did exercises and that might have been very in tune with a specific area, but if they just tried to push it out past an area of expertise, they didn't see the same results. And so, I think in the article I reference a temp agency where it's not, no fault to the temp agency. They're very much literally writing down what they see and how they understand it. But having expert project management, product experts, Six Sigma, lean teams out there, they really understand not just the product, but then the flow of the operations when we're working with our customers. So, if you have an inexperienced group, they're going to write down exactly what you would expect someone to write down that may not be familiar with it, or they might not write down enough, where a familiar eye is going to be able to pick up on nuances and other things much more quicker.
Mm-hmm. So they know the things to look for, they know the things that do need to be there, the things that don't need to be there.
Right.
So you're just getting better data in the first place.
Correct. I think it's also important to recognize that we're in front of products all day, every day. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We've got a structure, we've got governance around how we identify, create parts, et cetera. And so we're coming at it with a familiar eye, and it may be something new, but we look at the number of parts that we touch in a month or the number of items we're touching, it's millions of actual SKUs. So there's a level of familiarity built into the tools that we provide our employees and work with customers. And that coming off you think about someone who's coming in that's not familiar with that or armed with the right tools, it's going to be more of a challenge.
Okay. So you had mentioned some of the teams that we were expecting to put out when Fastenal is looking to go through somebody else's facility. You want to work with us because of our experts. We have engineers that go, right? Like all the way through your system. You mentioned the lean team. So with each of these different teams, is it a different type of experience that you're getting because they're all different experts? Or are all the experts coming together sometimes and you have like a whole group of them?
They play different roles. Ultimately, it's brought together. So the experts that are looking at the flow of products throughout a facility and how and where to best stock products based on where the need is. I mean, there's many steps within our footprint within a customer site, right down to point of use, from receiving, or it might be from the storeroom or whatever it may be. So, these experts are working together collectively to put together a total solution for the customer. And each one of them brings domain expertise. So the engineering team is going right through prints. We talk often about a plan for every part. And so whether that is how it's managed, confirming what the part is, the best way to handle it, min-maxes, or any forecast demand planning, all those factors play in with those team members.
Okay. You answered my question much better than I asked it.
I don't know about that.
We were talking about what does trusted data mean, and I think you're going to say kind of like a little nugget here, but why is it so important for AI?
Well, it requires trusted data to start with.
Well, yeah, okay, redundant.
That's a simple answer. But what does it mean? It means that that there's clear data ownership. That in Fastenal we catalog our data, so there's lineage, there's an understanding of what's required around that data, and it's updated almost often in real time or near real time. Okay. But it can be trusted, it can be counted on, et cetera.
Okay, so then what's an example of data turning into an action on the plant floor?
Okay, so we start with the part identification. What is the part, where is it, and we would call that a position level. Whether that position is within a vending machine or RFID, infrared, a storeroom, it's a part or an asset tied to a position. That typically wraps up into a planogram, that wraps up into a location, that wraps up within the site. So there's 4 layers to that. Once you understand that, you can really look at, well, what's the service levels I'm receiving throughout my plant? What's the frequency? You can start to understand how to better plan for your min-maxes, or you can make them more dynamic. So service levels, min-maxes, forecast demand planning, those are all the types of things that you begin to see and understand. But then it's very interesting as we work with customers, they begin to correlate that information to other things that they have going on within their facility that we may or may not know about, like whether it be a shutdown, or moving of equipment, or lines moving, et cetera. But that information becomes very important to our customers making better decisions about what's happening within the supply chain between their walls.
Okay, so looking ahead, what's the most exciting part of AI plus people, that model, for the next couple of years?
For the next couple of months, years?
Yeah, right, yeah. Right. What's the speed we're talking about?
Really, I think AI can improve the decision making. It can bring forth patterns it sees, like around opportunities or risks, and people really should take those into consideration and be the decision maker. So it's kind of a continuous loop where working with AI can help bring these things forward, but people act upon these things. One trend that we continue to see is that I don't believe software is going away, right? You've got a lot of your core transactional systems of record, but I believe they'll shrink to an extent because we'll be placing more AI tools to help in the decision-making process where some of those things in past would have been maybe developed within the software. So it's more about, can I bring you the right information knowing who you are, where you are at the right time to make the right decision, which makes the software lighter, but really that orchestration of what's happening around workflows informs the employee to make better decisions for the customer, for the business, et cetera.
Okay, so if someone wants to start experimenting with AI, what's step one?
The first step is identifying a use case that's going to provide real value. I think internally we say, AI is not a hammer looking for a nail. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Okay. Then it's really important that you identify and involve the right stakeholders. So who's the business owner? Who is going to be the data owner? Where's the dependency upon the data that we can trust to make sure those individuals are involved, especially when it's new, they can see the data being used and how it's being used. And then it's really about bringing together the right team, the right IT team members with the data owner as well as the business owner, and understanding what's the expected ROI that we see here. How are we going to measure that? And then how are we really going to understand the adoption and what's happening? And typically there's a feedback loop that plays into that. So those are the things that we think about when we're putting it together. I think the challenges are, as we've done many of these, that it's very important to stay focused on the why and the what. Why are we doing this and what are we doing? I see a lot of conversations drift into the how. And that's really where you're seeing a lot of the change today, is that from a technology standpoint, you're going to limit yourself if you describe your understanding of how it works, rather than really get very descriptive on why are we doing this and what should it be driving out. Be open to the number of different outcomes that come from what, because I think everything we've learned a lot from, and we've been able to iterate and grow off the original intention. I see most teams get tripped up when they're talking about how. In kind of the breakneck speed that this is all occurring in is what we could do, and what we did in Q4, I can look at here in the beginning of Q2 and say, we would do it differently today, and we would actually do it 10x faster. So the how, I think you leave that to the technologists, and it's really important to identify the why and the what.
You read about like AI has no ROI. There's like a lot of starts and stops. Am I in the right ballpark here, or is that not at all what we're talking about?
No, I think that's accurate. I think we've experienced that ourselves. What I was describing is what we look at, where we've seen our success come from.
Okay.
So,
okay.
No, I read a lot about like the lack of ROI that businesses are seeing, or I think you have to step back and really think about what is it that you're trying to achieve. I would, and I'm not speaking for all industries and all use cases, but I can speak within our walls that when we have use cases that are not well thought out, or we don't have the right people involved, or we did not really consult with the stakeholders, the users that are going to use this thing, there's some oversight that's often neglected.
Okay.
So
then finish this sentence. AI works when blank.
when you have trusted, grounded data, you've got a very well-defined use case, and you've got the proper stakeholders working together as a team to deliver. Okay. Kind of on I'll go on the reading theme that you brought up.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of conversations about AI and it kind of busting the traditional org chart. And where I've seen the most success, I've seen very small groups of teams, each playing those roles for a common cause around a project. Historically, you'd have members of those teams engaging in this, but really a small team of 5 to 7 people playing those roles, we've seen the greatest success, and it could be 3 or 4 different areas within the business doing that.
Okay.
And so, we very much subscribe to things are changing and shifting, and if you don't remain a student of what's happening right now, things will pass quickly.
You're going to learn a lesson one way or another.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's been pretty obvious that the speed of change is crazy for most people to even comprehend. What's your, I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but can you speak to the speed of change? Is this a normal speed that we're in right now? Is it only going to accelerate?
I mean, I believe it's only going to accelerate,
okay.
And it's a lot to keep up with.
Yeah.
I think as a team, as an IT department and team, we're talking about a lot of these topics and things that we see. It's really important that people start somewhere. Mm-hmm. So a lot of individuals are well-read, they're keeping up with what's happening and what's being released. You're watching what moves companies are making within acquisitions, how they're leveraging different components of the technology. Ultimately, you really need to know your business, you need to know your customers, you need to know the industry that you're in, and you need to reimagine how you go to market, serving customers, operating your business, and driving value ultimately, to the bottom line for all. So,
why should somebody be working with Fastenal on this?
Because we are a trusted partner. I think the big part of working with Fastenal is that we take ownership through the process. And so we're not just here to advise. We absolutely can advise, we have insights, but I think the real power is the implementation, the roll up your sleeve implementation, and then after that it's ownership and accountability. We're going to be there, we've got to perform, and we're accountable. So.
Okay. Well, we've mentioned this article about 14 times.
Right.
So we're actually going to put it in the comments, and it's going to be accessible there. What's your quick take as we say goodbye here? Why should people read this article?
Well, I think it gives you a good understanding and a very practical explanation of how Fastenal can step into the business and help you start somewhere.
Completely agree.
What we're capable of, and really the goal is to position a perspective of how to think about Fastenal. We're not just making deliveries and dropping them off back in receiving. We're truly integrated within a customer's site.
Okay. Well, look for the link, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.